Hi, everyone. My hands are sweating. As you all know, my name is Zahra, and that's also my cat. She's a part of me. I want to just give a warning before we start to the audience that I'll be talking about trauma-informed design and sexual violence. So please feel free to leave and get up and do whatever you need to do to care for yourself. Before I start, really, I just want to be very straightforward and candid with everyone here. People keep coming up to me and asking if I feel excited to graduate or happy that I'm up here. And honestly, the only thing I feel right now is being burnt out. I chose to do social design work that encompassed my lived experience. My experience around intergenerational trauma within the South Asian American community of women. I was warned by my mentors, my professors, my therapists, that the work would be hard and that I would need to be careful not to lose myself in the space of trauma, that I needed to prioritize rest. But I didn't really know how to do that during a pandemic. And I don't really know how to heal from traumas that brought me to this work in the first place. So maybe I need to take a step back first and start from the beginning of my story, the story of Sultana's dreamers. Before I get more into who Sultana's dreamers are, let me tell you this. I come from a lineage of storytellers and creative makers, of gift givers and ritual designers. I openly accept the gift of creativity from my nani, the gift of dwelling in dreams from my mother's dada, and from my father's dadi, the gift of Kashmiri chai. For my family, Kashmiri chai was more than just a recipe, but a ritual that would close the gap between generations. My dad claims he doesn't remember much about his childhood, but he has shared with me the story of his dadi, who would wake up at 5 a.m. on hot Pakistani summers to stand in the kitchen for hours making tea for her grandson. I never got the chance to meet her, but I'd like to imagine she knew she was brewing a ritual one day that my dad and I would practice together on weekend mornings years later. I'd like to think she knew it would heal me from trauma. It wasn't until I was sexually assaulted in my sophomore year of college did I realize how deeply embedded our cultural traumas are. For a long time, I kept my assault a secret from my parents and my community. As socially conscious as they had been, there was a theme of behaviors I saw were deeply tangled in our ways of being. I had heard how the boys in my community would throw around the word rape as if it were simply a cuss word. I would witness little girls in my community be told if they didn't cover their shoulders, they would serve as a distraction to their male relatives. I would hear women be called weak if they chose to go to therapy. And as a community member, my friend Zahra shared with me that you become hyper aware of yourself as a sexual being from a young age. There was a theme in general of how our bodies and our sexuality were being controlled by everyone but ourselves. The more I kept the secret of my trauma inside, though, it began to manifest itself in the form of dissociative PTSD, major depressive disorder, and severe anxiety. It manifested itself into sleep paralysis dreams, where I was forced to exist in an underworld of horror. My sleep paralysis became so common that I was forced to begin my healing process through therapy and alongside community. I could see more clearly now that my experience was not dissimilar to many of the brown women I've grown up amongst. As I started interviewing women, I noticed that we each identified feelings of loneliness, of disconnection, and overall sadness when interacting with our cultural communities. Fighting back against harmful expectations felt hopeless when our parents and grandparents could not understand why we seemingly wanted to reject those that had worked so hard to give us a life here in America. At least 2/3 of the women I spoke to are currently or have previously sought out mental health services, which is in line with the data collected by the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum, showing that a higher rate of suicide among South Asian women, that there's a higher rate of suicide among South Asian women than the general US population. From women like Ifra feeling overwhelmed by the expectation that we need to take care of everyone, to women like Asia, who told me that she feels she has to actively not express herself, our relationship to the communities that uphold these expectations and the relationship we have with ourselves becomes deeply fractured. But for the first time in my life during these conversations, I felt a sense of solidarity with these women. Even though the South Asian identity is complex, multicultural, and embedded with religious influences, our stories are woven together by the overarching need to heal ourselves and the relationship we have with our families. We wanted to understand why, even as first or second generation immigrants in America, we were continuing to consciously and subconsciously uphold harmful, misogynistic norms under the justification that we needed to preserve culture to survive. If I could delve far enough into our history to learn where these harmful practices came from, maybe we could figure out how to heal from them as well. And it'll come as no surprise to daughters of immigrants that it all starts with the violent British colonization of the Indian subcontinent. South Asian women during that time were subjected to the British implementation of a masculine economy that only allowed for some men to own land. Reclaiming power, therefore, depended on a South Asian woman's proximity to a man, such as marriage or giving birth to a son, and how she could mold her identity to fit his expectations. The need to get married, adhere to Eurocentric beauty standards, compete against other women, and be in service to the family would all become norms for South Asian women, behaviors that would get passed down for generations. On top of that, South Asian women would go on to experience tragedy after tragedy, from displacement, famine, rape, some of which would have been experienced in the near past or is currently ongoing, all remnants of colonialism. These responses to trauma would further embed in our psyches the need for South Asian women to survive through being whoever she is told to be. In the book, My Grandmother's Hands, we learn that when trauma gets compounded over time, it can begin to look like culture. These practices of controlling women's bodies, since being practiced for generations, would begin to seem like this is what South Asian culture looked like, but in reality, they were born as a response to cultural trauma. The next step now was to find out how many of these women, like me, developed personal practices of healing. In an attempt to find out, my last interview question was, what ritual or personal experience makes you feel most connected to your culture? We realized that in the common thread that weaves South Asian women closer to their mothers and grandmothers is creative expression and gathering. From brewing the chai recipes of our grandmothers, to dancing and singing, to gathering in knitting circles, South Asian women are able to explore their freedom through the language of creativity that transcends generational differences. The answers that I went through highlighted three overall themes of community, creative expression, and rituals. When we gather in community, we can use creative expression to design rituals for intergenerational healing. So I wondered then if we could create a communal space for women that did exactly that. In January of 2022, I reached out to 4 women who had previously been interviewed by me and expressed interest in being part of the process. Ifra, Samra, Mala, and Sonober are 4 South Asian women who have all grown up in America. All of them are in their late 20s, located on the East Coast, and share an interest in creativity, identity, and healing. From backgrounds in medicine, to writing, to design, to growing up with various religious influences and cultural practices from the South Asian subcontinent, each woman brought their expertise to the table in our discussions and in our activities. Although ideally we would have gathered in person, the pandemic forced us to meet each week for an hour from January to March over Zoom, and we used the digital platform Miro to interact with one another. But that did not alter our purpose, which is to co-design a space for creative storytelling and healing from intergenerational traumas. In order to ground ourselves in trust and intentionality at the start of each gathering, we established rituals. For the first 5 minutes of our meetings, we used a feelings chart to check in and name the 3 emotions we were bringing into the space. It was a strange practice for me, but a simple one that gently allowed for vulnerability and honesty to build between each other and ourselves. The next ritual was dedicated to a connection card game adapted from a game my cohort and I co-designed in a previous class. From what is the story of your name to what is something you have learned from an elder, each person was asked to answer the questions which both related to the theme of our gathering and strengthened our comfort in talking about ourselves. In crafting the agenda for each meeting, I followed my creative intuition to co-design a framework flexible for the needs of the collective. Overall, though, I knew we would start with trust building, understanding personal power and privilege, and then move into collaborative creativity. In our first gathering, we established 10 community agreements to create an environment of support, safety, and comfort where we could each hold each other accountable to our values. In the second gathering, we examined our power and positionality through identity mapping our given, chosen, and core identities to better understand ourselves and our relationships to each other. In the third gathering, we chose 3 of the identities from our maps that resonated most with us to develop fictional characters. In activating the creative functions in our brain, we were more easily able to have complex conversations around identities and personal histories. And in the fourth gathering, we celebrated each other's 100th birthdays and shared 3 wishes we've had for ourselves. Mala and Ifra each envisioned a world where our families have moved past the survival tendency, and Summer wished to be surrounded by loving, chosen, and biological families. In our 5th gathering, Ifra shared the short story Sultana's Dream by Bengali feminist pioneer Begum Ruqayya. In the story, the main character, Sultana, dreams of Ladyland, where traditional gender norms and roles observed in 1900s India are reversed. Deeply inspired by this work, the 5 of us imagined what our version of a feminist utopia like Ladyland could look like. We imagined a world where the characters we developed in earlier gatherings lived by shared values of virtue, knowledge, love, truth, and nature. It was a land where, for Sanober, elders were decision makers, but also acceptors of change. It was a land where Ifra saw a redistribution of wealth, regenerative agriculture, and where community gardens were abundant. It was a land where characters like Sumra's character Myra still suffered from anxiety but could find solace in sharing her hardships with her grandmother. It was a world where we were in full control and we could truly be ourselves. And then in our last creative gathering, we found out that in this futuristic world, our characters each find a time capsule in their homes and open it up to realize that it's from ourselves. I asked Mala, Ifra, Summer, and Sanober that as your character's ancestor, what are some things you put into your time capsule for them to find? What rituals, objects, and behaviors would you like to pass on as ancestors? We wanted to pass on the gift of dreaming, which had been given to us by ancestors like Begum Ruqayya. We wanted to pass on the tools and abilities we co-created to build community that several of us wanted to keep coming back to each week. We wanted to pass on our vision of a feminist future. Sanober wanted to share the connection cards with her mother, and Summer even wanted to facilitate new groups of Sultana's dreamers. We wanted to pass on the legacy as dreamers of our own futures. In reimagining our futures, we are able to see and share what we're healing towards. After our final gathering at the end of March, I felt myself longing for the community we as Sultana's dreamers had built together. I had not realized that the impact of our gatherings was so deep until a couple weeks later. You see, in the middle of all of this, I joined a therapy group. And I kind of, did it because my therapist was like, I'm co-leading it. And I was like, oh, I would love to join, I guess. It's a therapy group of first-generation Arab and South Asian American women. Like I said, co-created and co-led by my therapist. And I found myself minutes leading up to the meeting that I was constantly checking my hair. I was wondering how I was going to introduce myself. I was like, am I going to look really cool? Just really overthinking it. And even as the meeting began and I was listening to all of these women share their stories, I started to regret being part of a group where we're required to share our most deepest insecurities with a group of strangers. Something was telling me I couldn't do it. And then all of a sudden, my therapist posed the question to the group, "How are you feeling right now?" And it was instant. It was a simple and familiar question that instantly catapulted me into the reality of my situation. The distrust and skepticism I had automatically defaulted to was exactly the intergenerational trauma I had been actively working to abolish. I was reminded of our feelings ritual that I was so hesitant to even bring into the space from Sultana's Dreamers, and like muscle memory, I remembered that to expect trust, you have to give trust. True, I designed the mirror board, I facilitated our gatherings, but at the end of the day, Ifra, Mala, Samra, and Sonober designed the intervention. They designed the tools and the methodology by embodying the vulnerability it takes to build community. What we had designed as Sultana's Dreamers was not a product, but a learned behavior of healing in spaces of discomfort. So I guess after all of this, I do know how to heal from this. Generations of South Asian women have gifted healing and storytelling rituals to me, from my grandmother to my great-grandmother's Kashmiri chai, to each of the women who put their trust in me to share their stories. The purpose of my thesis is not to illuminate white America. It is not a plea to be centered in the narrative of activist academia, nor is it for the sake of creating a product to market intergenerational healing as a linear and established solution. My thesis is a story of how shifting and sharing power amongst each other can decolonize healing spaces. My thesis is for you, for the daughters of immigrants living in America whose lives have been dictated by those around us and who have been searching for belonging in a community of people who look like them. My thesis is for Zahra, for Mia, for Jennifer, the first mentors I've ever had who could offer enlightening wisdom since they truly understood my perspective. It's for my therapist and my therapy group who guided me through unlearning harmful ways of being. It's for my parents and my grandparents and ancestors whose work of intergenerational healing from traumas have given me the opportunity to present this work to you today. And it's for all the women I've grown up amongst who have shown me the existing cultural gifts of healing and liberation given to us by our mothers and grandmothers. Most of all, though, my thesis is the smallest token of the deep gratitude I have for Sultana's Dreamers. To Mala, Samra, Ifra, and Sonober, I know you all aren't physically here, but thank you so much for embodying the courage, the creativity, and the community that opened my eyes to what true intergenerational healing looks like. I learned that we must shift our mindsets to seeing our mothers and grandmothers as more than just survivors and victims, but as dreamers, storytellers, and healers. I want to end here with a request of my community to ask themselves this: how will you continue to create a world our ancestors have dreamt for us? Thank you.